G'day friends, it's Andrew here from Nature's Image Photography, and today I've got a video for you on the LEICA Panasonic 10 to 25mm F1.7 lens, which you can see here on my Panasonic Lumix G9. Now I'll be doing the video from behind the camera, but I wanted to come around to the front just at the start to say a heartfelt thank you to a man called John Rourke. John asked me to help him out with his Lumix G9 a couple of months ago, just to help him through a couple of the functions and the settings. And during that time I expressed an interest in this lens, which wasn't even on my radar at the time. And by the end of our session, John had very kindly offered to loan it to me. And not just for a day or two, but for as long as it took for me to get a proper feel for the lens. So John, thank you very much, and I guess I'm dedicating this video to you. Now let's roll the intro and we'll get started. So let's get hands-on with the LEICA Panasonic 10 to 25mm f1.7 lens. Before we start, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button to keep in touch with all my work on the G9 and my world of photography. And I want you to know right from the start that I'm not a seasoned camera or lens reviewer, just a guy who loves taking photos. And since I had the opportunity to get my hands on this lens, I wanted to give you my impressions. If you're looking for a more technical review, I'm sure there are plenty of them out there. The 10 to 25 is a very versatile zoom range. When you apply the 2x crop factor, it's equivalent in full frame terms to 20 to 50mm. That means it zooms from a standard lens to a very healthy wide angle. The first thing you notice about the lens itself is the size, and once you hold it in your hand you'll notice the weight. It's a surprisingly large and heavy lens for a wide angle, especially on a micro four thirds camera. Although not so surprising when you consider it's built to maintain that f1.7 aperture throughout its entire zoom range. There's not a lot of plastic on this lens, it's mostly made of magnesium alloy, and it's weather sealed to protect against dust and moisture. And all that adds up to a solid 690 grams. For a comparison, here it is next to my LEICA 100 to 400mm lens. As you can see, it's not as long, but it is a little wider, and it's about 3/4 of the weight. So it's not the heaviest lens out there, but as micro four thirds gear goes, it's definitely up there. Some people will appreciate the size and weight because it's a sign of a top quality, solidly built, weather resistant lens aimed at serious photographers, and it is all of those things. But if you bought into the micro four thirds because you wanted something compact and lightweight, then the size and weight of this lens might make you think twice. Now let's move on to the rest of the experience. First we'll look at the aperture, and this lens opens to an impressive f1.7 which it maintains right throughout the zoom range. Notice that it also stops at f16. That means if you're doing any kind of slow shutter speed photography in the daytime, you're probably going to need some kind of ND filter, even more so than with lenses that close down to something like f22 or 32. And speaking of filters, the lens diameter is 77mm, so that's what you'll be shopping for. As you can see, there's an aperture ring on the lens that gives you two options for how to select your f-stop. You can turn the ring manually to select the aperture the old-fashioned way. The movement of the aperture ring is very smooth with no notches, so you don't feel an obvious click as you move from one setting to the next, but the setting you choose will appear in the viewfinder or back screen of the camera. There's also a red A or auto position, and you do have to push a little harder to click into that position. That means you won't find yourself clicking in or out of the A position by accident. Once set to A, the aperture is operated by the Aperture Dial on the camera. On my G9, the aperture is assigned to the dial at the back of the camera. Now here you can see that when the aperture is selected on the lens, turning the dial on the camera does nothing. But if I switch the ring on the lens into the A position, I can now change the aperture using the dial on the camera, just as I do with almost any other lens. So this lens gives you two different and quite separate ways to select your f-stop. Now let's look at focus, and if you choose to shoot in autofocus, then things work just as they normally do, with all the usual functions available. When it comes to manual focus, once again this lens gives you two options. You can switch into manual focus on the lens itself. The middle ring on the lens is the manual focus ring. In the forward position the lens is set for autofocus, and when you slide it back you're now in manual focus. Once you slide that ring back, you can see the focus distance indicator, which is going to be appreciated by anyone doing night photography. And we can now see that the focus capability ranges from 28 cm through to infinity. The manual focus ring has a remarkably smooth movement, and it's easy to adjust focus without jerking the camera, as you can see in this quick video demo that I did entirely handheld. The other option for manual focus is to leave the slide in the forward position and simply switch to manual focus using the selection dial on the back of the camera. That's what I've done here, and you can see that I have focus peaking enabled to make sure I do my job properly. Finally, we come to the zoom itself, and this is operated by the largest rotating ring at the back of the lens nearest to the camera body. Once again, it has an incredibly smooth and easy movement, which makes it a pleasure to use for shooting stills and fantastic for shooting video. In fact, the more time you spend with this lens, the more you realise how much thought went into making this lens suitable for video. You can change the zoom, the focus, and even the aperture manually with no troublesome bumping or jerking of the camera. Combined with the Lumix's great image stabilizer, you can do all of that handheld and still provide the viewer with a smooth viewing experience. Now, I'm no videographer, but perhaps these little samples, all shot handheld, will give you some idea of what could be achieved in the hands of an expert. So, in my opinion, the LEICA Panasonic 10-25mm is a top quality lens that's a pleasure to use. But what about some results? I'll finish this video with a few of my favourite photos taken on the 10-25, but here are a couple of basic observations. In terms of distortion, I found that at 10mm there is a very slight curvature of the horizon when it's near the top of the frame, so slight that you would only notice it if you were really looking for it, and much less than on a lot of cheaper wide-angle lenses. You will notice the familiar leaning inwards of upright objects near the edge of the frame, but that's to be expected on any wide angle, so you can't really mark it down for that. For image quality, colour and sharpness, well, as I said, I'm not a technical camera reviewer, so I'm not going to show you a lot of lab tests and colour charts. Suffice to say, I'm impressed with every aspect of the image quality, and you can judge for yourself when you see more of my photos at the end of the video. So I think you can tell I'm pretty impressed with this lens, and I would be happy to recommend it based on so many pros. But are there any cons? Well, here are a few, but as you'll see, whether they actually are cons might be a matter of opinion. First, I've already mentioned the size and the weight. This is only a drawback if you bought into the Micro Four Thirds system because you wanted gear that was light and compact. Other photographers may actually put this one into their pros column. Next, the price. This is a professional lens and it's priced accordingly. I won't mention a price here because there are so many variables around the world, and whatever I say would be out of date in no time. Suffice to say that it's a very substantial lens and it comes at a substantial price. Probably well worth it for professionals, but for casual photographers, this is far from being a casual purchase. Finally, there's no image stabilizer on the lens. That means I can't take advantage of the dual stabilizer system offered in my Lumix G9, but I still have the excellent in-body stabilizer, which I find more than enough, especially for a wide-angle lens. So the pros on this lens are many, the cons are few. Overall, I'm really impressed with this lens, and I've been excited by the variety of things I've been able to photograph in my short time using it. So with thanks again to John Rourke, here's a presentation of some of my favourite photos taken on the LEICA Panasonic 10-25mm f1.7 lens. I'm Andrew Goodall, this is Nature's Image Photography, thanks for watching.